They pushed my chair back and said it out loud so everyone could hear. That seat was for her ex. I stood there while her son laughed, while the family stared, while Helena nodded like it was normal. I didn't argue. I didn't leave. I memorized who was watching. My name is Tanner Jossman, and I've spent the last 5 years building something I thought mattered. A tech consulting business that pulls in 7 figures annually, a marriage to Helena that looked perfect from the outside, and a stepson named Keaton who I foolishly believed might one day respect me. Tonight, sitting at this mahogany table in Helena's mother's dining room, surrounded by crystal glasses and fake smiles, I realized how wrong I'd been about everything. The Christmas dinner had started normally enough. Helena wore her burgundy dress, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Keaton sat across from me, scrolling through his phone between courses, occasionally looking up to smirk at something on his screen. The extended family filled the other seats, Helena's mother Gloria at the head, her sister Patricia with her husband, a few cousins I barely knew. Then Rhett Vossen walked in. Helena's ex-husband, Keaton's biological father, strutted through the front door like he owned the place. Designer suit, expensive watch, that confident swagger that comes from never having been truly challenged. He'd been invited, apparently. Helena had forgotten to mention that detail. "Sorry I'm late," Rhett announced, scanning the table. His eyes landed on me, then shifted to the empty chair beside Helena. "Looks like someone's in my spot." The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying their meal, but the tense silence that precedes disaster. I felt every eye at that table turn toward me, waiting to see what I'd do. Keaton was the first to speak. "Yeah, that seat belongs to my real dad. Get out." 19 years old and still acting like a spoiled child. But this time, instead of Helena correcting him like she usually did in private, she just nodded. Actually nodded, like her son's demand was reasonable. "Keaton's right," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "It would be better if Rhett sat there. Family tradition." Family tradition. 5 years of marriage, and I was learning about family traditions that excluded me. I looked around the table again, cataloging faces. Gloria was practically glowing with satisfaction. Patricia looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The cousins were already whispering to each other, probably composing the group text that would spread this story through the family network before dessert was served. I could have made a scene, could have reminded Helena that I'd paid for half the gifts under their tree, that my business had funded Keaton's private school tuition, that the car Rhett drove here was financed through a bank where I had connections. But instead, I did something else. I pulled out my phone. Under the table, keeping my expression neutral, I opened my secure email app and composed 3 messages. The first went to my business partner, triggering a prearranged protocol that would freeze certain shared accounts. The second went to my lawyer, activating a trust restructure we'd discussed months ago. The third went to my sister Maggie, who worked in legal aid and understood family law better than most people understood their morning coffee routine. Then I canceled a wire transfer. $50,000 that was supposed to clear tomorrow morning, funding Keaton's spring semester tuition. With 2 taps, that money stayed exactly where it was. Finally, I scheduled a document release for midnight, papers that Helena had signed without reading, trusting me to handle the financial details of our marriage. Papers that would become very relevant in about 6 hours. All of this took less than 2 minutes. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked up to find Rhett standing beside my chair, waiting. "No problem," I said, standing up. "Enjoy your seat." I moved to an empty chair at the far end of the table, next to Helena's elderly uncle, who spent most of dinner complaining about his arthritis. From there, I had a perfect view of the whole family. I watched Rhett settle into what had been my chair, watched him lean over to whisper something in Helena's ear that made her laugh. I watched Keaton pull out his phone and start recording, probably planning another TikTok video about his pathetic stepdad. Dessert was served an hour later, some elaborate cake that Gloria had ordered from an expensive bakery downtown. As everyone focused on their plates, I stood up again. "This has been lovely," I announced, my voice carrying just enough volume to get everyone's attention. "Merry Christmas to all of you." Helena looked up surprised. "You're leaving already?" "Early morning tomorrow," I lied smoothly. "Business calls." She didn't argue, neither did anyone else. I collected my coat from the front closet, walked past Rhett's flashy BMW in the driveway, and got into my own car. A modest sedan that I'd bought with cash, no financing, no co-signers, no complications. As I drove away, I could see them through the dining room window, already back to their conversation, probably relieved that the awkward moment had passed. They had no idea what was coming. My first move happened at the table. I sent 3 emails, canceled 1 transfer, and scheduled a release for midnight. I stayed quiet, wished them Merry Christmas, and walked out after dessert like nothing mattered. But everything mattered. Every signature Helena had trusted me with, every financial decision she'd delegated because numbers were boring, every legal document she'd signed without reading because that's what husbands are for. Tonight, all of that trust was about to become her biggest mistake. I drove to my office downtown, a modest space in a converted warehouse that housed my consulting business. The building was empty on Christmas night, just the way I needed it to be. I had work to do, Helena countered fast. She posted photos with her ex in my house, tagged me as unstable, and told the family I was jealous and broke. She didn't know the documents she mocked were already queued, signed, and time-locked. The social media assault started before I even made it home from the office. My phone buzzed with notifications as Helena's Instagram posts went live. Photos of her and Rhett in our living room, sitting on the couch I'd bought, drinking wine from glasses we'd received as wedding gifts. The captions were carefully crafted to paint me as the villain. Sometimes you have to choose family over toxicity, read one post. Grateful for the people who truly support me, said another, but the real damage was happening in the family group chat. My phone lit up with screenshots that Keaton was helpfully forwarding to me, probably thinking he was twisting the knife. Helena had painted a picture of an unstable husband who couldn't handle his wife maintaining a healthy co-parenting relationship. She'd told them I was financially controlling, emotionally manipulative, and increasingly paranoid about her friendship with Rhett. Tanner's been acting strange for months, she'd written. Tonight was just the final straw. I think he's having some kind of breakdown. The family ate it up. Gloria responded with heart emojis and offers to help Helena through this difficult time. Patricia shared her own horror stories about difficult men. The cousins chimed in with supportive messages and promises to always be there for her. What none of them knew was that while they were busy crafting their narrative, my midnight release was ticking down like a time bomb. I spent Christmas night in my home office, a room that Helena rarely entered because it was too cluttered with my computer equipment and business files. From here, I could monitor everything: bank accounts, business systems, property records, even the smart home network that controlled our house's security and utilities. At 11:47 p.m., I received confirmation that my lawyer had filed the trust restructure. At 11:52, my business partner confirmed that the account freezes were in place. At 11:58, my sister sent a simple text. Documents received. Holy cow, Tanner, you've been planning this for a while. She was right. I had been planning, just not consciously. Every precaution I'd taken, every separate account I'd maintained, every legal structure I'd insisted on for tax purposes. It all added up to a perfect defense against exactly what was happening tonight. At 2:17 a.m., my release went live. The house, the accounts, and the business they used every day were never hers. The trust reverted. Access was cut. The contracts auto-expired. Rhett lost his position before sunrise. Keaton's tuition portal locked. The first sign of trouble came at 6:23 a.m. Helena's credit card was declined at the coffee shop where she always stopped on her way to work. She called me immediately, her voice tight with panic. Tanner, there's something wrong with our account. My card isn't working. Which account? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Our joint checking. The one we use for everything. The bank says there's a hold on it. That's strange. Did you check the balance? I can't access it online. My login isn't working either. Because the account had been restructured at midnight, transferring control back to the trust that I'd established before our marriage, a trust that Helena had never been added to, despite her assumptions otherwise. I'm sure it's just a technical issue, I said. You should probably call the bank. She did call the bank. Then she called me back, her voice rising toward hysteria. They're saying I don't have access to the account anymore. They're saying it was never a joint account, that I was just an authorized user. That can't be right, can it? I'd have to look at the paperwork, I said, but I'm sure we can sort it out. We couldn't sort it out, of course. There was nothing to sort. The account had always been structured to protect my business assets, with Helena having access only as long as our marriage remained intact. Now that she'd chosen to prioritize her ex-husband over her actual husband, that access had been automatically revoked. The phone calls kept coming throughout the morning. Her car payment had bounced. The automatic transfer for Keaton's spring tuition had failed. The credit line she'd been using to renovate her law office had been suspended pending a review of her financial status. But the real panic set in when she tried to get into the house. Helena had spent the night at her mother's place, probably planning to return home with Rhett in tow to continue their reunion. Instead, she found herself standing on the front porch at 10 a.m., unable to get her key to work. Because I'd changed the locks, not just the physical locks, though I'd done that too. The smart lock system that controlled our front door, garage, and security system had been reset to factory defaults with new access codes that only I knew. The home automation system that Helena loved to brag about to her friends, the one that controlled everything from the thermostat to the coffee maker, was now completely locked down. She called me from the front porch, and I could hear the wind in the background as she stood outside her own home. "Tanner, what did you do? I can't get into the house." "What do you mean?" "My key doesn't work. The code pad isn't responding. Even the garage door won't open." "That's very strange. Have you tried the back door?" She had tried the back door. She'd tried every door and window, growing more frantic with each failed attempt. Finally, she'd called a locksmith, only to be told that changing the locks on a property required proof of ownership, proof that Helena couldn't provide, because the house had never been in her name either. Like everything else in our marriage, the house was owned by my business trust, with Helena listed as a resident rather than an owner, a distinction that had seemed unimportant when we were happily married, but became very important when she decided to humiliate me in front of her family. "I don't understand what's happening," she said, her voice breaking. "This is my home, too." "Is it?" I asked quietly. The silence stretched between us for a long moment. Then Helena's voice came back, harder now, angry. "You can't do this? I have rights. I'll call my lawyer." "You should definitely do that," I agreed. "I'm sure they'll explain everything." She hung up on me then, but I wasn't worried. Helena's lawyer was expensive and competent, but they specialized in corporate law, not family disputes. It would take them days to untangle the legal structure I'd spent years building, and by then, my next moves would already be in play. I spent the rest of the morning monitoring social media and the family group chat, watching Helena's narrative shift from difficult husband to financial abuse. The family rallied around her, offering spare bedrooms and emotional support. Rhett posted his own messages, positioning himself as the stable presence Helena needed during this difficult transition. But I noticed something interesting in their messages. None of them were offering real help. No one was volunteering to pay Keaton's tuition or cover Helena's car payment. They were happy to provide sympathy and outrage, but when it came to actual financial support, the family seemed remarkably reluctant to get involved. That afternoon, I drove to my boxing gym downtown, a rundown place in an old warehouse district where my friend Jude trained fighters and taught self-defense classes. The gym was one of the few places in my life that Helena had never tried to change or improve, probably because the clientele didn't fit her image of what her husband's hobbies should look like. Jude was working the heavy bag when I walked in, his massive frame moving with surprising grace for a man in his 50s. He'd been a bouncer for 20 years before opening the gym, and he had the kind of practical wisdom that came from dealing with human nature at its worst. "Heard you had an interesting Christmas," he said without stopping his workout. Word traveled fast in our circle. Jude probably knew more about last night's dinner than most of Helena's family did. "Interesting is one word for it," I replied, wrapping my hands for my own session with the bag. "You know what your problem is, Tanner?" Jude paused his workout and turned to face me. "You're too nice. You let people walk all over you because you think being reasonable will eventually win them over. And what would you suggest instead? Stop being reasonable. Start being effective." I spent an hour working out my frustration on the heavy bag, thinking about Jude's advice. He was right, of course. I'd spent 5 years trying to earn respect through kindness and financial generosity, and all it had gotten me was a public humiliation and a family that saw me as an outsider to be discarded when convenient. Time to try a different approach. They woke up to frozen cards, inactive phones, and emails that couldn't be undone. The Christmas table was still set. The seat was empty. I didn't go back. By December 27th, the full scope of Helena's situation had become clear to everyone involved. The family group chat that had been buzzing with supportive messages 2 days earlier had gone suspiciously quiet. Reality had a way of dampening enthusiasm for other people's problems, especially when those problems required actual money to solve. Helena was staying at her mother's house, sleeping in her childhood bedroom like a teenager again. Keaton had been forced to withdraw from his spring classes when the tuition payment failed to process. Rhett, who had been so confident about reclaiming his place at the family table, was discovering that emotional support didn't pay for his own mounting bills. I, meanwhile, was having the most productive week of my professional life. Without the constant interruptions of Helena's social obligations and Keaton's various crises, I'd been able to focus entirely on my business, 3 new consulting contracts signed, 2 major projects completed ahead of schedule, and a partnership opportunity that I'd been too distracted to pursue properly for months. My office felt different now, cleaner somehow, more purposeful. I'd removed the framed photos of Helena and Keaton from my desk, replacing them with technical manuals and project timelines. The space felt like mine again, rather than a stage set designed to prove I was a good family man. The first real counterattack came on Thursday morning. Helena had finally found a family law attorney who was willing to take her case on a contingency basis. They filed an emergency motion claiming financial abuse and seeking immediate access to marital assets. The motion was denied within hours. Judge Patricia Kowalski, who reviewed the emergency filing, noted that all the accounts and properties in question were owned by business trusts that predated the marriage. Helena's access to those accounts had been voluntary on my part, not a legal requirement. The judge suggested that Helena's attorney might want to review the prenuptial agreement more carefully before filing additional motions. The prenuptial agreement that Helena had signed without reading, trusting me to handle the legal details. The prenuptial agreement that protected my business assets in exactly this scenario. Helena called me that afternoon, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "You planned this," she accused. "You've been planning this for years." "I planned to protect my business," I corrected. "The same business that paid for your lifestyle, your son's education, and your family's Christmas gifts. If you'd chosen to respect our marriage instead of humiliating me publicly, none of this would have been necessary." "I didn't humiliate you. I just thought it would be nice for Keaton to have his father there for Christmas." "And where was I supposed to sit, Helena? In the kitchen? On the floor? Or did you just assume I'd be so grateful for whatever scraps of respect you threw my way that I'd stand in the corner and smile while your ex-husband took my place?" She didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't a good answer. She'd made a choice, and now she was living with the consequences. "This isn't over," she said finally. "I'll find a way to fight this." "You're welcome to try," I replied. "But you might want to focus on finding a job first. I hear your law firm is hiring." That was a low blow, and I knew it. Helena's position at her firm was somewhat precarious. She was a competent lawyer, but not an exceptional one, and her role was more about client relations than legal expertise. Without the financial stability that my business provided, she'd be under pressure to prove her worth in ways she'd never had to before. But I was past the point of pulling punches. Friday brought a new development. Keaton, who had been relatively quiet since Christmas night, suddenly exploded across social media with a series of posts painting me as an abusive stepfather who had financially trapped his mother and was now destroying their family out of spite. The posts were well crafted and emotionally manipulative, designed to generate sympathy and outrage. Within hours, they'd been shared hundreds of times, with comments ranging from supportive to violently angry. Several people suggested that Helena should take him for everything he's worth in a divorce settlement. What they didn't understand was that there was nothing to take. My business assets were protected by corporate structures that had been in place long before Helena and I met. My personal assets were minimal by design. I'd always preferred to keep my wealth tied up in business investments rather than personal property. The house, the cars, even the furniture were all owned by various business entities, with Helena and I as residents rather than owners. It was a structure my accountant had recommended years ago for tax purposes, but it turned out to have other benefits as well. Saturday morning, I decided it was time to make a public response. Instead of engaging with Keaton's social media posts directly, I took a different approach. I created a simple website, just a single page with a clean, professional design, and posted a timeline of events from Christmas night forward. No emotional language, no personal attacks, just facts. Screenshots of the family group chat showing Helena's claims about my mental state, bank records proving that I'd been paying Keaton's tuition and car insurance, property records showing the actual ownership structure of our house, and finally, a copy of the prenuptial agreement that Helena had signed, with her signature clearly visible at the bottom. I didn't share the website publicly. Instead, I sent the link to 3 people, my sister Maggie, my business partner, and my friend Jude. Then I waited. The beauty of the internet is that truth spreads just as fast as lies, especially when the truth is more interesting than the lies. By Sunday afternoon, the website had been viewed thousands of times. Screenshots were circulating on the same social media platforms where Keaton's posts had gone viral. The narrative was shifting. Instead of an abusive husband financially controlling his wife, the story was becoming one of a successful businessman protecting his assets from a family that had never respected him. The Christmas dinner incident, which Helena had tried to downplay as a simple misunderstanding, was now being seen as a calculated humiliation designed to push me out of the family. Public opinion, it turned out, was not on Helena's side. Sunday evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Rhett Vossen stood on my front porch, looking significantly less confident than he had at Christmas dinner. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "Do we?" I replied, not inviting him in. "This has gone far enough, Tanner." Helena's family is falling apart. Keaton can't afford to go back to school. She's talking about having to move back in with her mother permanently. And you think that's my problem? Because you're supposed to be the adult here. You're supposed to care about Helena and her son. I studied his face for a moment, noting the desperation behind his aggressive posture. Rhett was scared, though he was trying hard not to show it. Helena's financial collapse was affecting him too, probably in ways he hadn't anticipated. Where were you for the last 5 years, Rhett? I asked quietly. When Keaton needed a father figure for his graduation, his birthday parties, his college applications, when Helena was building her career and needed support, when her family needed someone to pay for Christmas dinner and birthday gifts and family vacations. That's different. I had my own life to rebuild. And now you want to rebuild it with my wife, in my house, using my money. Is that about right? He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Helena deserves better than this. Helena deserves exactly what she chose, I replied, not backing down. She chose to humiliate me in front of her family. She chose to prioritize her ex-husband over her current husband. She chose to let her son disrespect me in public, and now she gets to live with those choices. You can't just cut her off like this. It's not right. What's not right is a grown woman who thinks she can treat her husband like a disposable ATM and expect him to keep paying for the privilege. What's not right is a 19-year-old who thinks he can publicly humiliate his stepfather without consequences. What's not right is an ex-husband who shows up after 5 years of absence and expects to reclaim his place at the table. Rhett's face was turning red, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to hit me. Instead, he took a step back. "This isn't over," he said, echoing Helena's earlier threat. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over since Christmas night. You just haven't accepted it yet." I closed the door and watched through the window as he walked back to his BMW. The car that I now knew was leased rather than owned, financed through a dealership that was struggling to stay afloat in the current economy. Rhett's confident facade was built on the same kind of financial house of cards that had just collapsed around Helena. They were perfect for each other, really. Monday morning brought news that changed everything. Helena's law firm, which had been struggling with its own financial issues, announced a round of layoffs. Helena's position, which had always been somewhat redundant, was eliminated effective immediately. She called me in tears, her anger replaced by panic. "They let me go, Tanner. They said it was budget cuts, but I know it's because of all this drama. My reputation is ruined. No one's going to hire me now." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I genuinely was. I'd never wanted to destroy Helena's career, just to protect myself from her choices. "Please," she whispered. "Can't we work this out? Can't we go back to the way things were?" "Can we?" I asked. "Can you uninvite your ex-husband from family dinners? Can you teach your son to respect the man who's been supporting him for 5 years? Can you choose your marriage over your past?" The silence stretched between us for a long time. "I don't know," she said finally. "Then you have your answer," I replied, and hung up the phone. The trap I'd been building for weeks was finally ready to spring. Not a trap of revenge or malice, but something more elegant. A trap of consequences, where every choice Helena and her allies had made would lead them exactly where they'd chosen to go. It started with a phone call to my sister Maggie on Tuesday morning. As a legal aid attorney, she understood family dynamics and financial abuse from both sides. More importantly, she understood the law. "I need you to do something for me," I told her. "Helena's going to contact you soon, probably through her new lawyer. She's going to claim that I've been financially abusive, that I've trapped her in a marriage where she had no access to money or resources." "Have you?" Maggie asked bluntly. She'd never been one to sugarcoat difficult questions. "You tell me." She had full access to our household accounts for 5 years. She had credit cards, a car, spending money for whatever she wanted. The only accounts she didn't have access to were my business assets, which were protected by a prenup she signed willingly. But she didn't understand what she was signing. She didn't bother to read what she was signing. There's a difference. Maggie was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to represent her." "What?" "Take her case. Represent her in the divorce proceedings. Make sure she gets exactly what she's legally entitled to under the prenuptial agreement. Tanner, that's either very generous or very cruel. I can't tell which." "It's fair," I said, which is more than she was willing to be. The beauty of having my sister represent Helena was that it removed any question of bias or unfair advantage. Maggie was an excellent attorney who would fight hard for her client's interests. If Helena couldn't get a better settlement with my own sister representing her, then there simply wasn't a better settlement to be had. Wednesday brought the next phase of my plan. I called Helena's mother, Gloria, and asked if we could meet for coffee. She agreed, probably hoping to guilt me into reversing my position. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place Gloria normally avoided because it wasn't upscale enough for her image. But these days, she was being more careful with money, probably because she'd realized that her daughter's financial collapse might require some family support. "This has to stop, Tanner," she said as soon as we sat down. "Helena is my daughter. Keaton is my grandson. You can't just abandon them like this." "I haven't abandoned anyone," I replied calmly. "I've simply stopped subsidizing people who don't respect me." "It was one dinner? One misunderstanding?" Was it a misunderstanding when Helena posted photos of herself with her ex-husband in our house? Was it a misunderstanding when Keaton made videos mocking me on social media? Was it a misunderstanding when the entire family sat there and watched me be humiliated without saying a word? Gloria shifted uncomfortably. Family dynamics are complicated. They don't have to be. Respect is simple. Either you treat people with dignity or you don't. Helena's family chose not to. "So what do you want? An apology?" "I want honesty," I said. "I want you to admit that you never accepted me as part of the family. I want you to acknowledge that Helena married me for financial security, not love, and I want you to stop pretending that this is all my fault." Gloria's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? You've spent 5 years treating me like an outsider who was useful for paying bills and funding family events. The moment Helena's ex-husband showed up, you were ready to throw me away like garbage. Now that the money's gone, suddenly I'm family again?" She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're making a mistake, Tanner. Family is everything. Without family, you have nothing." "Then I guess we'll find out what Helena's family is really worth when they have to support her themselves." Gloria left without another word, but not before I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew as well as I did that the family's support for Helena was mostly emotional. When it came to actual financial help, they'd all find excuses to avoid getting involved. Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Detective Paul Greeley, a family friend who worked for the city police department. Helena had filed a complaint claiming that I was harassing her and making threats. "I have to ask, Tanner," Paul said when we met at his office. "Have you been in contact with Helena or her family since Christmas?" "She's called me several times. I've answered her calls and been polite. I met with her mother yesterday at her request. I haven't initiated any contact, and I certainly haven't made any threats. She says you're stalking her social media, that you created a website to embarrass her publicly." "I created a website with factual information about our situation. Public records, signed documents, bank statements. If Helena finds facts embarrassing, that's not my problem." Paul nodded slowly. He'd known me for years, and he'd met Helena enough times to form his own opinions about our relationship. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "this feels like someone trying to create a paper trail for a divorce settlement. You're not in any legal trouble, but be careful. Don't give them any ammunition." "I won't," I promised. "I'm not interested in hurting anyone. I just want to be left alone." "Fair enough. But Tanner, whatever you're planning, make sure it's legal. I'd hate to see this situation get worse." I assured him that everything I was doing was completely within the law, which was true. I wasn't breaking any rules, I was just following them more carefully than Helena had expected. Friday brought the culmination of my week's work. Helena's new attorney, working with my sister Maggie, had finally completed their review of our financial situation. The settlement offer they presented was exactly what I'd expected. Helena would receive her personal belongings, her car, which she'd have to take over payments on, and a modest amount of cash to help with her transition to single life. Total value, approximately $15,000. It was a fair settlement under the prenuptial agreement, but it was nowhere near enough to maintain the lifestyle Helena had become accustomed to. No house, no ongoing support, no college fund for Keaton, just enough to get started on a new life, if she was willing to live within more modest means. Helena called me that evening, her voice hollow with defeat. $15,000, she said. "That's what 5 years of marriage is worth?" "That's what the prenuptial agreement specifies," I replied. "The same agreement you signed without reading. I trusted you. And I trusted you, right up until you decided that your ex-husband's comfort was more important than your current husband's dignity. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Helena. You made a choice. You chose to prioritize your past over your present, your ex-husband over your current husband, your son's attitude over your marriage. Now you get to live with that choice. What am I supposed to do now? The same thing millions of divorced women do every day. Get a job, find an apartment, build a life. You're a smart, capable person. You'll figure it out. And Keaton? What about his education? Keaton is 19 years old. If he wants to go to college, he can get student loans like everyone else. or he can get a job and save money, or his biological father can step up and support him. Those are all reasonable options. You know Rhett can't afford college tuition? Then maybe Keaton should have thought about that before he decided to publicly humiliate the man who was paying for his education. The silence stretched between us for a long time. When Helena spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did, I said gently. Maybe not consciously, but you did. You wanted your old life back. You wanted the excitement of being with Red again, the simplicity of a family that didn't include an outsider like me. You just wanted it without giving up the financial security I provided. But life doesn't work that way, Helena. You can't have everything. So this is it? 5 years of marriage and you're just going to walk away? I'm not walking away. I'm standing still. You're the one who chose to leave, remember? You left our marriage the moment you decided that your ex-husband's feelings were more important than mine. She hung up without saying goodbye, but I wasn't surprised. There wasn't really anything left to say. Saturday morning, I woke up in my house. My actual house, not the family home I'd been sharing with Helena and Keaton, for the first time in weeks. It was a smaller place, a condo I'd bought years ago as an investment property and kept as a backup plan. Not as impressive as the suburban house Helena loved, but it was mine, completely and legally, with no complications or shared ownership. The silence was remarkable. No television blaring in the background, no music from Keaton's room, no phone calls about social obligations or family drama, just quiet, peaceful silence that let me think clearly for the first time in months. I made coffee and sat on my small balcony, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Helena was probably packing her belongings at her mother's house, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life she'd never had to build on her own. Keaton was probably posting angry messages on social media, blaming me for consequences he'd brought on himself. Rhett was probably realizing that reclaiming his ex-wife meant taking responsibility for supporting her, something he wasn't prepared to do. And I was here, free and clear, with my business intact and my future entirely under my own control. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when Helena and I got married 5 years ago, but it was the ending their choices had made inevitable. The Christmas table was still set somewhere in my memory, with that empty chair where I'd been sitting before Keaton told me to leave. But I wasn't going back to that table, and I wasn't going back to that chair. I was building a new table, one where every seat was earned through respect rather than inherited by lineage or claimed through entitlement. And this time, I was the only one who got to decide who was invited to sit down.